Pranam Maharaj.
Namaskar. Oh, Kamala. Hello, Kamala.
Hi Maharaj.
Glad you're here.
I am happy to.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and what? Let me see if I can find out where we are as far as date goes. Boy, we're way into a chapter. We must be close to it, close to the end here of a chapter or something. Yes, we're at the end of chapter 15. And the paragraph tonight, it's starting, a neighbor is asking a question. But Ramakrishna had given some very beautiful instructions last week, and I kind of just want to run through it so that we don't pick up in the middle of the conversation without sort of following the thread. And he says something very important because he's actually giving instructions that are very usable for us in our practice here. He says, by turning the mind within oneself, one acquires discrimination, and through discrimination, one thinks of truth. So this idea of turning the mind within itself, that is what I've talked about quite a bit lately. That notion of going into your inner world, closing your eyes, shutting out the senses, and discerning, seeing what's in there. Thakur gives the idea that that which is changing is unreal, and that which is unchanging alone is real. And so you can take things one at a time like that, but there's a middle step that you can put in there, and that is this discerning of what is the body and how does it feel, what is it, how does it affect your inner world? Notice its boundaries within that space of your inner world. And the mind, how does the mind feel? How do you know something belongs to mind? And you get familiar with that by paying attention to how everything works in your inner world when you've shut out all of the senses and you're just going inward and being silent. And then to become acutely aware of yourself as the observer, as the witness. So you become aware of awareness. And so this once you start being familiar with the difference between the changing and the unchanging, the self that's implied, because the self can't be observed. The mind can be observed, the body can be observed, but that which is observing the mind and the body, that itself cannot be observed. And that's why it's so hard for us to identify with it. It's so hard for us to know that that is the one real thing, because it's the thing that we never pay attention to. It is the attention, it is the source of the attention that we pay to everything else. And so by going in and seeing this and becoming aware of this and understanding it so that you can tell when you have a certain impetus inside, oh, that's mind, oh, that's body, and the more you watch it, the more clear you become, and the earlier you can catch a thought or catch a temptation or catch a desire before it actually develops and grabs a whole bunch of other samskaras, other memories and whatnot, and creates a state of mind. And so that's why he says that it makes you think of truth, because you actually get that sense of truth, that sense of what is. You like that Rothko painting I was talking about. You actually get a sense of what is being observed without seeing it as an interpretation of mind. You can see things and become aware of things before the mind has actually been able to get them and package them to show you in a particular way.
Excuse me,
So
Swamiji. So, how do you get it before the mind interprets it?
by understanding that you're not the mind, and the mind begins to silence. And so silent mind doesn't process stuff and present it to you as the observer.
Right.
It becomes a window instead of an interpreter as it silences. And so then he says, then the mind feels the desire to go for a walk to Kali, the wish-fulfilling tree. That bliss of self begins to manifest when you've separated yourself through a constant discernment between, okay, that's body, okay, that's mind, okay, I'm the observer, okay, become aware of the witness, become aware of awareness. And as you get better and better at that, the effect of the awareness, the effect of the self in there starts becoming more evident to you, more apparent to you, because you're no longer attached, literally attached to the mind and attached to the body. Now you're kind of aware of that inner space with some clarity. And at that point, you begin to become aware of certain aspects of the awareness itself, the bliss, the love, the beauty, the peace, the calmness, the lack of desire that arise from there, the freedom, the timelessness, all of these constrictions and constraints that normally drive our whole life begin to weaken and begin to fall away to a certain degree. And we're no longer caught up in the cycles of our desires and fulfillments and then desiring again, going over and over and over again. And the mind begins to be more interested in that, actually starts to become more interested in the self than it is in the noise, in the changing. And when that begins to happen, I love the way he says to it, that the mind develops this desire to go for a walk with Kali, with the Divine Mother. That is to say, the wish-fulfilling tree. And reaching that tree, that is to say, going near to God, going near to the witness, growing ever more aware of the nature of the awareness, you can, without any effort, gather the four fruits, namely dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Yes, after realizing God, one can also get, if one so desires, dharma, that rightful right living, that sense of purpose, that knowing how to act and how to be in the world based on who you are, as you become familiar with that, and the enjoyment and the freedom, all of those things come to us of their own accord in their proper channels and in their proper arrangement. And it's no longer kind of left to karma to sort it out, that it's not, we now kind of understand what's happening. We understand it has an order and a clarity to it that was missing before. And so then the neighbor now, this is where we pick up with the new place tonight. The neighbor says, then why should one call the world Maya? He says, well, if that's possible, if you're able to do all of that in the world here, why do we call the world Maya? And the master says, well, as long as one has not realized God, one should renounce the world following the process of neti, not this, not this. That's the renunciation, right? And the discernment. So the reason that we call it Maya is it's not that the world is unreal. That's one truth that Ramakrishna really brings to the front that is pretty new to the world. It's pretty unique to him in that he says it because, Shankaracharya talked about the Maya as an illusion, that it wasn't real, and he pretty much just left it at that. But the master is saying that the world isn't unreal. What is unreal is what you think the world is. That's the illusion. But the world is actually a unity. The world is actually the manifestation of the divine principle of love and wisdom and being. And so he says, as long as you haven't sussed out the presence of the divine in you, as long as you haven't become aware of awareness, or as long as you haven't become aware of yourself as the witness in there, you have to do the work. You have to discern, go through that discernment, that discrimination process of what is changing in here. Okay, does that thing that's changing, does that belong to mind or does that belong to body? And you can see, you discern the changing things and you know those to be unreal because that's what the master teaches. And it puts your mind back on that which is not changing. The only thing that does not change in the universe is the witness within you. That is the same witness in every single one of us. And that is the one unchanging thing. And that is God. That is divine. All right. The rest of the time, we have to go inside and follow the process of not this, meaning, okay, I'm observing that, so it's not me. So not this. I'm observing that, so it's not me, right? Because if you can observe it, it's obviously not who you are. You've third-partied it. It's in front of the senses, and you are behind the senses. But he who has attained God knows that it is God who has become all of this. Right? Once you've gone through this whole process of discerning and understanding where you are and what your nature is in the inner world of your mind. And once you've learned to get pretty good at maintaining that separation without getting caught in the stickiness of it, then the second part happens. And, this one I can't say is familiar to me at this point, obviously. But this notion that after you've done the separation, then you begin to realize that one doesn't exist without the other. That they both, just like we come to realize that the thinker and the listener can't actually be different. You can't have a thinker without the listener. You can't have one without the other, and that they are both sourced in the unity in you. You are both the thinker and you are the one who watches your thinking. So you're both the talker and the listener. And when you come to realize that, you come to see that both of those are coming from the same source, that's when we begin to suspect or begin to realize, or it starts to become apparent to us that, wow, all of this is sourced in the self. All of this is coming from the self, this whole world. And at that point, you start coming close to knowing that which is known, all is known, by which knowing everything becomes known. I think that's the way Tagore talks about it. So you find that one piece of knowledge that explains everything, that all of this has become, that God has become all of this. There is no duality whatsoever. And at that point, you're just a breath, a puff away from moksha, from freedom of knowing that the seeing everything as it actually is and not as you have always thought it to be. God knows that it is God who has become all of this. Then he sees that God and Maya, the illusion, living beings, and the universe form a single whole, a single unity, a oneness. God includes the universe and its living beings. There was never anything that was separate from God, from the divine, including the self. Everything is a manifestation of this divinity of God. And you begin to see that directly, not know it philosophically, not know it as knowledge that you learn in school, but knowing it as you know that you're alive right now. It's not a piece of knowledge, it's experiential knowledge. So he says, suppose you have separated the shell, the flesh, and the seeds of a bell fruit, and then someone asks you, how much did that fruit weigh? Will you leave aside the shell and the seeds and weigh only the flesh? Not at all. To know the real weight of the fruit, you must weigh the whole of it, the shell, the flesh, and the seeds. Only then can you tell its real weight, right? So he's saying that all of this is necessary, and we see it as separate because of the level of our consciousness, the level of the awareness of what we are, right? When you are see yourself as a dual, when you see that there's a world outside of you that you're not, that is not you, at that point you see that duality, you see that separateness. But he's saying that these can't actually be separated. There is not a demarcation where you begin and the universe stops. You come to know that that's an illusion, that has always been an illusion, that there's no line there. When he says that it's like fire and its power to burn. Well, if you were to take your finger and try and find out where does fire's power to burn stop and where does fire begin, you find that you can't do it. Fire and its power to burn, even though we see it as two things, are in fact a singularity that cannot be separated. You're just going to burn yourself pretty good if you try. So that's what he's saying here. To know the real weight of the fruit, you must weigh the whole of it, the shell, the flesh, and the seeds. Only then can you tell its real weight. The shell may be likened to the universe and the seeds to living beings. While one is engaged in discrimination or discernment, one says to oneself that the universe and the living beings are non-self and unsubstantial, right? So when you are in the early process of trying to find out who you are, within this inner experience. He says, when you're doing that, you say that the living beings in the universe are the non-self. These are the things that are not me, right? Because they're changing. I'm wanting to see the unchanging. And that they have no substance. And he says, at that time, one thinks of the flesh alone as the substance, the self within, that one of the three that's within. You think that's the only real thing in there. But after discernment is over, meaning after you've sussed it out, you've understood your inner world, you know what body is, you know what mind is, you know that all the changing comes from them, and that this observer that you are, that never changes, you begin to know. He says, after that discrimination, after you've reached that part, one feels that all three parts of the fruit together form a unity. That they all are interdependent somehow. You can't have one without the other in manifestation, in the world of the manifested, that is, right? Then one further realizes that the stuff that has produced the flesh of the fruit has also produced the shell and seeds. To know the real nature of the bell fruit, one must know all three. You have to become aware of body, you have to become aware of mind, you have to become aware of self. And then once you're aware of that, the rest of this begins to slowly come in around the edges, and you begin to understand. You begin to see it as it is. After having separated them out, you begin to see that there is a boundary between them that isn't a boundary. It's an assumption. It's an interpretation of experience, but it is not the truth of that experience. And you slowly begin to see, I and the television are one. I and my dog are one. That oneness actually becomes palpable to you, actually becomes something that is experiential and not projected as knowledge on you. He says it is the process of evolution and involution, right? That everything spinning, kind of the process of the thought coming, arising, manifesting, and falling. So involution is that falling, evolution is that awakening, that coming out. The world and after its dissolution remains involved in God, and God at the time of creation evolves as the world. Butter goes with buttermilk, and buttermilk goes with butter. If there is a thing called buttermilk, then butter also exists. And if there is a thing called butter, then buttermilk also exists. If the self exists, then the non-self must also exist. The phenomenal world belongs to that very reality to which the absolute belongs. So you can see that it is your absolute nature within, that silent space in the shrine that's unchanging. That is what keeps the tent, the big top up. You know, that's the center post of the circus tent. Without that post, that tent can't exist and the circus can't go on. There's a definite dependence there. The phenomenal world belongs to that very reality to which the absolute belongs, right? Both the circus and the pole belong to each other, and neither is necessary without the other. Neither can happen without the other. Again, the absolute belongs to that very reality to which the phenomenal world belongs. He who is realized as God has also become the universe and its living beings. He's become both the tent and the center pole. He's become the activity of the circus and the tent and the pole, all three things becoming one. He who is realized as God has also become the universe and its living beings. One who knows the truth knows that it is he alone who has become father, mother, child, neighbor, man, and animal, good and bad, holy and unholy, and so forth. He alone, you know, that it is God is that which has become all of these things. Just like you are the one that becomes an entire world when you dream at night. You have become that. You have become all of the factions of your dream, even even the stuff that in the dream seems to be not you. It is all of you. As soon as you wake up, all of it disappears. And so the same implication in this world, thou art that. When your awareness ceases, the world that you have lived in also ceases. Neighbor. He says, then is there no virtue and no sin? If this is all true, if there's only one without a second, then how can anything be wrong? How can anything be right? How can there be any judgment if there's only one thing? If God has become all of this, and if God has become all of this, why do I have karma? Why am I unrealized in this mess of things? Right? So the neighbor's asking, why is there no virtue? Is there then no virtue and no sin? Master, they both exist and do not exist. Paradox, right? They exist, we experience them. And yet they don't exist, we transcend them, they disappear. So he says, if God keeps the ego in man, then he keeps in him the sense of differentiation and also the sense of virtue and sin. As long as you think of yourself as a particular something, everything else is going to be not that particular something. So you're going to have two sides of a coin. Anything that is helpful to that particular something is going to be virtue. And anything that is unhelpful to that particular something becomes vice, becomes unhelpful. And so, but you have to have that perspective. And when you have that one perspective, you can only see one side of the coin at the time. When you have the universal perspective, you know everything at once. There is nothing hidden from you. So he says they both exist and do not exist. If God keeps the ego in a man, if he keeps that sense of separation in a person, then he keeps in him the sense of differentiation and also the sense of virtue and of sin. But in a rare few, he completely effaces the ego, completely removes it, completely has it destroyed in a very small select number of people. And they go beyond virtue and sin. They actually come to a place where there is only God, the doer, in the dream. Nothing is actually being done. Nothing is actually happening. And because of that, there's not actually any karma being accrued. There is only isness, love, and wisdom. Nothing else, no matter what it looks like when it's stirred, it's the same. So in a rare few, he completely effaces the ego, and these get to go beyond virtue and sin, good and bad. As long as a man has not realized God, right? As long as you have not finished that discernment within and understood yourself to be the observer of this subjective world, right? And realize that your nature is that unchanging absolute within the center of the shrine. Until you've known that, he retains the sense of differentiation and the sense of good and bad. You may say virtue and sin are the same to me. I am only doing as God bids me. But you know in your heart of hearts that these are mere words. Right? We all go around, all of us as Vedantins. Oh, the truth of it is that there's one without a second. We have no idea what we're saying when we say that. We have no understanding, no experiential knowledge of that at all. We have a philosophical ideal that we believe ultimately will prove itself to be true. But at this moment, we treat the world as a duality. We never doubt the existence of our house. We never doubt the existence of our car, of our clothes, of our face, of our body, or of our mind, right? And so we may say we are one without a second, that we're Advaitist Vedantins, but in reality, everybody's an atheist, right? In reality, we will work on our belief in God. We'll work on our belief that these ultimate truths are real. But when it comes down to it, we'll put our seatbelt on also, right? So we kind of keep our feet in both worlds, and that's all right at this level. God knows that is the way, but ultimately we become real believers in God, not as a concept or an idea, but as an experienced reality, as an understanding, an isness. But you know in your heart of hearts that these are mere words. No sooner do you commit an evil deed than you feel a palpitation in your heart. Even after God has been realized, he keeps the mind of the devotee, if he so desires, the feeling of the servant ego, right? So you exist. I serve God. I love God. God is my mother. God is my father. So he may give you a great deal of spirituality, but keep you embodied. And he'll keep you embodied by growing in you an ego that isn't the ego of accomplishment or the ego of good looks or the ego of great talent or the ego of nice clothing and lots of money. He won't put that ego into you. But what he'll do is he'll put an ego into you that means you identify yourself as a servant of the beloved, right? You are the master and I am your servant. Such a devotee enjoys only spiritual talk and spiritual deeds. He does not enjoy the company of ungodly people. He does not care for any work that is not of a holy nature. So you see that God keeps the sense of differentiation even in such a devotee, right? That's the play. We know that Mother is enjoying this play. She becomes us. She plays our part. She believes us to have our name and our character and our personality and all the things we like and dislike. She thinks that is actually her thinking that she likes and dislikes some things, right? But it just goes on like that because Mother likes the play. You have not realized God because you like the play. You enjoy being the named personality that you are. You're comfortable with the world that you've created in your mind. It's familiar to you. You've sort of set up a situation where you can make yourself believe that you are the doer as long as you don't look too closely. You can sort of see that the infinity has limits and very comfortable corners and handles that you know how to manipulate, you think, and you've maintained that outlook. And it's very, very scary to actually see that begin to dissolve. Ramakrishna shares that. Vivekananda, you know, that first experience where Ramakrishna was wrestling with Vivekananda and he touched Vivekananda's chest with his hand, and Vivekananda says, you know, the walls of the temple began to whirl around and fall away into nothingness. And he said, I began to watch everything disappear, and I cried out in fear. I cried out, well, I have a mother and father at home. What are you doing? My mother and father, they're going to miss me. No, I have my mother and father. So attachment brings him back. And when he comes back into the real world, Swami says, oh, you too? You too? I thought you might be different. Okay, yes, your mother and father are here. Go take care of them. Right? So he says, I am the master, or you are the master, I am your servant. Such a devotee enjoys only spiritual talk and spiritual deeds. He does not enjoy the company of ungodly people, right? Because he can see the nonsense. He's like, why? You guys are totally making this stuff up. Why are you sitting there talking about it so heavily, so convincingly? You know the reality, and so consequently you can see everybody indulging in fantasy, and it holds no interest for you. It's not a judgment. It's just simply you know better, right? The same reason you don't go hang out with toddlers, right? When they're sitting there talking about the toddler nonsense, generally you don't go and engage in it and care deeply about what they're saying, how they're pouring their imaginary tea, how they're making their imaginary doll sit. That doesn't, unless you're actively deciding to play, which interestingly enough is a point in and of itself. But unless you're actively doing that, you don't tend to do that. So the same with worldly people. It's not a sense of judgment like, oh, those are ungodly people. It's like how those people are saying nothing and believing it. Look, I can't. I'm just not interested in doing that. I get that they're into it. I get that they think it's real. I get that they're appreciating it, and I get that there's some good in it for them. Right? It's not judgment. It's just disinterest. You've seen something that is real, and you don't feel like indulging in that which isn't real. He doesn't care for any work that is not of a holy nature. So you see that God keeps the sense of differentiation even in such a devotee. The neighbor. Well, you ask us, sir, to live in the world after knowing God. Can God really be known? Is this really true? Can we actually attain this state? Because right now I can tell you, I'm right here and the room is over there. I'm sitting right here and that television is right there, and we are not one. I can get up and go over and poke it. And you can see even in that statement, we believe that we're a body because you're going to use the body to get up and go over and poke it. And you say, see, I can go over and poke it. Well, the eye doesn't go anywhere. The eye doesn't move. The eye is unchanging, right? It's the body that moves and the mind that thinks it moves. And the master says, God cannot be known by the sense organs or by this mind, right? The very, 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 and I could go on for 3 days, and I won't, saying very, to talk about how important this sentence is. God cannot be known by the sense organs. The senses cannot reveal your nature to you. Right? God cannot be found through the senses. The senses are the distraction. They are the reason that Eve fell for the fruit and Adam followed. He cannot be known by the sense organs or by this mind, but he can be known by the pure mind, right? The pure mind. And we know that the pure mind, the mind that is free from worldly desires. And what does it take to be free from worldly desires? It is that knowledge that you are not the mind, that you are not the body, that you are not a particular. All desires arise from body and mind. So he's saying the same thing in slightly different ways to give us different perspectives so that those of us who see things in different ways can understand as well. So God cannot be known by the sense organs or by this mind. So when you sit down to do your meditation, don't go looking for feelings, don't go looking for thoughts, don't go looking for experiences, because God is behind all of that. He is not any of that and cannot be found in any of that. But he can be known by the pure mind. That is you just sitting there in surrender, letting the mind do what it does without any interest in it, just withdrawing your sense of I from mind. And that means not thinking that any thought that arises or falls has anything to do with you, that nothing in the mind is describing you or interests you or has anything to do with you whatsoever. Same thing in the body, knowing that all the feelings and its sensations of the body, none of them are you. They have nothing to do with you. So he can be known by the pure mind, the mind that is free from worldly desires. The neighbor, you can just hear the exasperation. Well, who can know God? Goodness gracious. Look at the conditions I'm experiencing. How in the world could I ever do that? The master, right. You are right. Who can really know him? But as for us, it is enough to know as much of him as we need. What need do I have of the whole well of water? One jar is more than enough for me. An ant went to a sugar hill. Did it need the entire hill? A grain or two of sugar was more than enough. Now, what's he saying here? This is a very interesting way of talking about it. And I'd like to spend a moment here because I think this is really important to understand. What he's saying here is don't think that this is something you have to go and grab and collect. You don't have to go and get your whole realization, and until you get your realization, there's nothing. That's not it. As you progress, the mind slows down slowly, 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 and the space between thoughts becomes more and more. And Mother can start slipping love notes through those spaces in thought to you. When one thought ends, before the next one begins, in that little space, you'll catch a glimpse. You might even get to touch the live wire of pure love inside and get a good shock from it. That will change your perspective forever, make you understand. Your faith grows really strong when that happens, because you seen it, you've tasted it, not through the senses, but through an isness, through a silence. And that knowing that we can't do this causes surrender. It causes a letting go, and it's what allows you to relax into the truth that is immanent and always within you. It's not a thing that we're building. It's not a thing that we're developing or achieving. All realization is a surrendering, a letting go, a relaxing into the truth. It's not something that, because we start out, I mean, it's very helpful in meditation to start saying to yourself, I am not the doer. So what do you think you're going to accomplish in meditation if you're not the doer? How are you going to accomplish anything? You can't. That becomes the source of your surrender, the source of your opening, the source of your letting go of your sense of a particular self and just accepting this which we know by intuition. Right? These things that we know that we shouldn't know, these ideas of immortality, these ideas of an unconditioned love, these ideas of an infinite wisdom, these ideas of an eternity. These are things that this world and this mind could never have come up with because there is no indication of them whatsoever in the material world. These are understandings and ideas and inspirations that came into the world with us because we are that. We are all of those things. And we are the only example of that unchanging self within. Right? Neighbor. Well, sir, we're like typhoid patients. How can we be satisfied with one jar of water? We're terribly thirsty. Typhoid patients desperately want that electrolyte water. They're not going to be happy with one glass. As a matter of fact, have you ever seen there's a YouTube video of a baby that the mother is giving that little taste of ice cream? She puts the ice cream cone up there and just lets it touch the tongue of the baby. And that baby tastes that ice cream for the first time, and his eyes, or her eyes, I think it's a she, the eyes open real wide, and both of her hands that she can't even really open her fingers, she can't even control her hands, just clamp onto that ice cream, in the ice cream cone, and the mother is no longer able to pull the ice cream cone away from the baby. It's that kind of reaction that we have for this world. We're just, especially when the sense of self becomes threatened. Even Thakur talks about that when he had his realization in the shrine at Dakshineshwar. He said that he felt that fear, he felt that trepidation when these waves of bliss were rushing in this ocean of consciousness, this ocean of light that he was suddenly in the middle of. And he said these enormous waves of bliss were rushing and crashing over him, threatening his very sense of I. And that terror of that disappearance of the familiar, that disappearance of what we're comfortable with, our nicely drawn and boundaried world begins to be washed away. So this person's saying, that's how we are. We're like that baby. It's like, we can't, how are we going to be content with anything except the whole? And the master says, that's true, but there is a medicine for typhoid. It can be cured. It is not your nature to be needy. It is your ignorance that makes you needy. Right? So there is a way of repairing this. There is a way of transcending this, of seeing through it. And he tells us, what is that medicine, sir? The neighbor's like, yes, tell me. The master, the company of holy people. Hang out with people who are discerning and discriminating and renouncing. People who are doing the work, who are earnest and sincere, who are loving and caring, people who are pushing against the boundaries of ego to try and help themselves transcend, to relax into God. And then he says, repeat the name of God, right? The name and the form are not separate. So when you say the name of God within you, that is God. So say it and listen as you say it. Watch as it's being said And let, after you, it's one of the fast ways of seeing that you're not the doer. Once the mind gets in the habit of saying the name of God, you can just watch the mind do the mantra. You don't actually have to make it happen. And you begin to get an idea of how it is that Thakur says you're not the doer. All of the mind is running according to samskara, its habitual behaviors. And you can see that in the way that it takes the mantra and just keeps spinning that mantra, spinning that mantra. Some 25 years ago, I used to take, when I was still working in the world as a contractor, and was walking between clients in San Francisco because I didn't need to drive because San Francisco's such a great walking city. I took it upon myself to begin the practice that every time my right foot hit the ground, I would begin my mantra, and I would just cycle it. After 2 steps, the mantra would begin again. 2 steps, the mantra would begin again. And after 2 weeks of practicing that, to this day, if I go for a walk, it's inevitable at some point the mantra will begin of its own accord when my right foot hits the floor. It's just second nature now. It just happens without effort. And so you get the mind to that condition where it's repeating the name of God without you actually having to do it. It's just going on. And you just watch and open to the presence, right? Let the form, let that which the mantra indicates, the name of God indicates, come into your awareness. Come into your awareness. And he says, the company of holy men, repeating of the name of God, singing his glories, singing about the unconditioned love, singing about the amazing wisdom, singing about the delightful impetus to worship, to profundity, to eternity, to, all of these natures, all these names of God, all these attributes, big quotes, attributes of the divine. Sing about them. Put your mind in them. Don't let your mind be going down with the thought of sex or the thought of desires or the thought of flavors or the thought of, vacations and colors and things of the senses. Don't get caught up in the things of the senses. So we do that. He says, so the company of holy men, repeating the name of God and singing his glories, and the practice of Brother Lawrence here, the practice of unceasing prayer. And what is unceasing prayer? It's not something that you actually have to do. It's understanding by observing that it's everything you're doing. Every action is a prayer. Every thought is a prayer, right? So just know that. The body is a prayer, the mind is a prayer. See it that way. That means bring the presence of God into everything that you're doing. You don't have to change everything you're doing to sit down and just pray unceasingly. No, you grow in the observance that everything is a prayer, that it is desire or longing or a sense of lack that creates action. So you're asking God for everything. Through every action and through every thought. So coming to know that and living in that observance, knowing that you are continually in the presence of the beloved, and that love is the one unchanging motive, and that one unchanging motive is manifesting through you from the inside out. He says, I pray to the Divine Mother, right? I pray to the Divine Mother. Mother, I don't seek knowledge. Here, take your knowledge. And by knowledge here, he means that knowledge of storing things in the head and figuring out the relationships between that object and all of the other objects in your head. Secular knowledge, the knowledge of chemistry, the knowledge of of things that you have to put into your head and then set up all of the associations with each other. He says, I don't want that. I don't want head knowledge. I don't want stories. I don't want, facts and figures. That's not what I'm looking for because I'm not the mind and I'm not the doer. How will they help me? So I don't seek knowledge. Here, take your knowledge and take your ignorance. Take the duality there. I don't want them. Give me only pure love for you, for your lotus feet. That's all I want. I want pure love, a love that has no desire. a love that does not condition itself by how it's treated or what it gets or doesn't get. Give me only pure love for your lotus feet. I didn't ask for anything else. As is the disease, so must the remedy be. The Lord says in the Gita, O Arjuna, take refuge in me. I shall deliver you from all sins. All right. Does he say you stop all sins? No. Right? You can't fix yourself. You can't bring yourself to realization, because the realization is that which you think is yourself is unreal, does not exist. So how can that which is unreal and non-existent, how can that be the doer that fixes you? No. Yours is to surrender. Yours is to take refuge in God. Yours is to silence yourself, put up your hands, and say, ah, Mother. And in that faith of assumption, faith and assumption become the same at the beginning. You assume the presence of this divine bliss, of this divine love. You assume the perfection within you that is the divine principle that created you. You assume your eternity. You assume your freedom. And you exert it again. I am ever free. I am ever pure. I am ever blissful. I am ever a child of the divine. Over and over. O Arjuna, take refuge in me. I shall deliver you from all sins. Take shelter at his feet. He will give you right understanding. Not that you will begin to understand rightly because you've tried and effort and made it and this, that, and the other. No, because you surrendered. You let go of your wrong thinking. And when you let go of your attachment to wrong thinking, what takes its place? Your nature begins to manifest, and right thinking takes its place. He will give you right understanding. He will take entire responsibility for you. How much of it is your responsibility if God is taking full responsibility? It is none. So you surrender to your practice. You do it as an act of surrender. It needs to be done. I surrender to it. It is done, right? Not that I do it. I make myself available. I allow the mantra to start in my mind. I allow God to enter my thoughts. I allow the beloved to teach me of an unending and infinite and unconditioned love, right? He will give you right understanding. He will take entire responsibility for you. Then you will get rid of the typhoid. Then your disease of egoism will end. Your disease of separateness, your disease of suffering, your disease of loneliness, your disease of restlessness, your disease of anger and jealousy and fear, right? Your disease of believing yourself to live and die. Can one ever know God with such a mind as this? Can one pour 4 seers of milk into a 1 seer pot? Do you think the mind that is a doer, an ego that is making an effort, do you think that pot could ever hold anything? Do you think you as a person, as an individual, as a separate idea from God could contain God? Could contain your realization? Do you really think that you can realize God? How big do you think you are that you think that you will be able to hold the entire unity of all things ever conceived into a oneness? No. See from the beginning, your effort to do this as an ego self is absurd. It's ridiculous. Can we ever know God unless he lets us know him? Therefore I say, take shelter in God. Let him do whatever he likes. He is self-willed. What power is there in a man? So very beautifully clear. So very beautifully clear. Surrender. Open your heart and your mind in silence to hear the words of the beloved that are naturally and inherently in you, because you are an heir and not a beggar. You are all sons of God, daughters of God. You are that infinite self, ever free and ever pure. Take shelter in that notion. take shelter in that idea. It's just an idea, sure, at first, but it doesn't remain just an idea for long. It does not remain an idea for long. The first time that idea starts to teach you something that you actually didn't know, or to show you something that you have actually never seen, then it begins to occur to your stupidity that maybe that's stupidity. maybe that what you thought was imagination was actually real. As all things start in imagination and manifest. So let us stop there for tonight.